Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 4th of May 2019 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now, this particular article appears on page number 6 as an editorial. The title of the article is GST Beyonce. This article shall be important from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Indian Economy. Now, this particular article highlights that for the month of April 2019, the Government of India has collected around 1.13 lakh crores in the form of GST. Now, this is considered to be significant because this is the highest ever GST collected by the government in a single month since its introduction in July 2017. In this regard, this article here analyzes the trends with respect to the GST collection in India. Further, it also analyzes the reasons for the increase in the GST collection. Now, this particular article becomes important with respect to your upcoming prelims because if one looks at the previous year UPSC prelims questions have been asked with respect to the trends in important economic parameters. Now, for example, in the year 2015, there was a question related to the trends with respect to the real GDP and the nominal GDP. Similarly, in the year 2017, there was a question with respect to the trends in the tax revenue collected by the government as well as the fiscal deficit. Similarly, this article is also important because in prelims 2017, there was a direct question related to the goods and service tax wherein we are asked to find out as to what are the advantages of implementing the GST in India. Hence, as part of this video analysis, what we would do here is that first and foremost, we will analyze the trends with respect to GST collection, and secondly, we'll understand as to what are the reasons for the increase in the GST collection. As you all must be aware that the GST was introduced on July 1st, 2017. So since its introduction, the amount of GST collected by the government has fluctuated every month as highlighted in this particular graph. However, if you look at the amount of GST collected every year, it has consistently shown an improvement. For example, in the year 2017-18, the total amount of GST which was collected was around 7.4 lakh crores. And this has increased to around 11.7 lakh crores for the year 2018-19. On similar lines, if one looks at the average monthly collection of the GST in the year 2017-18, it was around rupees 90,000 crores. However, in the year 2018-19, the average monthly collection of the GST has now increased to around rupees 98,000 crores. Now, the lower GST collections in the year 2017-18 can be attributed to two main factors. The first factor being the implementation challenges with respect to GST, and the second factor being the adverse impact of demonetization. So because of these two reasons, the amount of GST collected in the year 2017-18 was lesser. Now, with respect to total amount of GST collected in April 2019, it was around rupees 1.13 lakh crores, and this is considered to be quite significant because this is the highest ever GST collected in a single month since its introduction on July 1st, 2017. Now, with respect to the present financial year 2019-20, the Government of India has kept a target to collect a GST of around 13.7 lakh crores. And in order to achieve this particular target, the average monthly collection of the GST should be at around 1.14 lakh crores. Now, with respect to upcoming prelims, the facts and figures which are quoted here are not that important. However, what is important to be noted here is that the average GST collection over a period of time has consistently shown an improvement. On similar lines, the average monthly collection of the GST has also shown an improvement. Apart from that, you all must be aware that the goods and service tax has different components. These components are the central GST, the state GST, the integrated GST, and the GST cess. Now, the GST cess has been introduced in order to compensate the states for any loss in their revenue. So, if you look at these four components, it is the integrated GST which contributes the highest amount of revenue to the goods and service tax. On similar lines, the GST cess contributes the lowest amount of revenue to the goods and service tax. However, if you consider only the three components, that is the central GST, the state GST and IGST, among these three components, the central GST contributes for the lowest revenue to the GST. Now, this particular fact with respect to the contribution of different components to GST becomes extremely important with respect to your upcoming prelims. Further, as we have discussed, in April 2019, the amount of GST collected by the government was highest ever since its introduction on July 1st, 2017. Now, this is quite surprising because the Indian economy as such is slowing down. And whenever the economy slows down, it would mean that the people are buying less amount of goods and services, because of which the collection of indirect taxes, particularly the GST, reduces. However, what is shown here is that the amount of GST has actually increased in spite of the decline in the economic growth. Hence, in this regard, let us try to understand the main reasons for the increase in the GST collection for the month of April 2019. Now, there are a number of reasons as to why the GST collection has consistently improved in case of India. Now, first and foremost, there has been an increase in the tax base, which clearly points the fact that there is a higher level of compliance among the businesses. Secondly, as you all must be aware, the GST Council has recently undertaken the rationalization of the GST tax rates, wherein the GST Council has reduced the tax rates on number of goods. So, because of the decrease in the tax rates, the consumption of goods and services in the Indian economy has increased. And this higher consumption of goods and services has in turn led to an increase in the GST collection. Apart from that, the editorial also highlights that the tax authorities have taken strict action against those firms which have failed to pay the GST, because of which the GST collection has improved. So going forward, as we have discussed before, the government has set an ambitious target for the GST collection for the year 2019-20, wherein the government has set a target to collect around 1.14 lakh crore worth GST every month. Hence, in order to meet this ambitious target, the government needs to focus on three main aspects. First and foremost, the government has to focus on the simplification of GST laws. Secondly, the government has to reduce the tax compliance burden, particularly on the micro, small and medium enterprises. And the government has to take a more number of measures in order to widen the tax base. Now, by focusing on these three aspects, the government would be able to realize its target for the financial year 2019-20. Apart from that, as we have seen in the previous year UPSC prelims, questions have been asked with respect to the trends in important economic parameters such as the GDP growth rate, tax collection, share of direct and indirect taxes, etc. Hence, with respect to your upcoming prelims, let us understand the trends in the important economic parameters. Now, if you look at this particular pie chart, this pie chart basically denotes the contribution of different sources to the revenue of the government. And upon the analysis of this particular pie chart, you can come to a conclusion that the corporate tax and the goods and service tax contributes the highest to the revenue of the government, wherein the share of corporate tax and the goods and service tax is almost the same. On similar lines, if you look at the share of corporate tax and the share of income tax, the share of corporate tax is much higher than the share of income tax. Now, this becomes extremely important with respect to your upcoming prelims. On similar lines, if you look at the trends in the tax receipts, the tax to GDP ratio in India has consistently increased, wherein at the start of the decade in the year 2011-12, the tax to GDP ratio was around 10.2%. However, by the end of the year 2018-19, it has increased to around 12%. More importantly, if you look at the tax to GDP ratio in the last 5 years, that is from the year 2004-5 to 2018-19, you can see clearly here that the tax to GDP ratio has consistently increased. So this increase in the tax to GDP ratio in the last 5 years becomes important with respect to your upcoming prelims. Similarly, if you look at the share of the direct and indirect taxes in India, presently the share of direct taxes is around 6.4% of India's GDP. However, the share of indirect taxes is around 5.5 percentage. So since the share of direct taxes is higher than the share of indirect taxes, we can say that the taxation system in India is progressive. On similar lines, if you look at the trends with respect to direct tax collection in India for the last 5 years, it has consistently increased from 5.4 percentage to 6.4 percentage. On the other hand, with respect to indirect tax collection, it has got fluctuated in the last 5 years. Similarly, with respect to trends in various deficits in India, so if you look at various deficits in the last 5 years, that is from the year 2004-5 to 2018-19, all the four deficits, that is the fiscal deficit, primary deficit, revenue deficit and effective revenue deficit, all of these four deficits have reduced in the last 5 years. So you can make a note of these important aspects with respect to your upcoming prelims examination. Now coming to the questions asked in the previous year UPSC prelims, the question which was asked in the year 2015 was, with reference to Indian economy, consider the following statements. The first statement was the rate of growth of real GDP has steadily increased in the last decade. Now you all must be aware the real GDP is the GDP at the base year prices. So if you look at the first statement here, the first statement here is wrong. This is because the real GDP had declined during the financial crisis of the year 2008-9. However, if you look at the nominal GDP, which is the GDP at the current market prices, this has consistently increased in the last decade. So the answer to this particular question was B, that is 2 only. Similarly, the question which was asked in the prelims 2017 was the tax revenue as a percentage of GDP has steadily increased in the last decade. Now this statement here is wrong. This is because the tax collection had declined during the economic recession. The second statement reads as the fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP has steadily increased in the last decade. As we have seen in the graph, the fiscal deficit has actually reduced. So even this statement here is wrong. So the correct answer to this particular question is D, neither 1 nor 2. Similarly, with respect to the question asked in the prelims 2017 with respect to GST, the correct answer to this particular question was A, that is 1 only. Thus, having analyzed all the aspects related to this particular article, let us now move on to the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 5. The title of the article is Not Keeping a Record of Pre-Natal Test is Criminal, Supreme Court. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, Governance, under the subsection Government Policies and Interventions. Now before analyzing this particular article, let us first look into its background. The Indian society has consistently shown a higher preference for sons as compared to the daughters. This is evident in the declining sex ratio in India. Now the sex ratio here basically pertains to the number of females per 1000 males. So if you look at the sex ratio in India at the start of the century, it was around 972. However, according to latest census of 2011, the sex ratio has now reduced to 940. Similarly, if one looks at the child sex ratio, that is the number of females in the age group 0 to 6 years per 1000 males in the same age group, this particular child sex ratio has shown a consistent decline, wherein in the year 1961, the child sex ratio was around 976. However, according to latest census of 2011, it has dropped down to 914. Now, what is surprising here is that normally the economic growth in a country is accompanied by the social transformation, which leads to an improvement in the status of females. However, if one looks at India, even though Indian economy has been growing at rapid pace, the society's preference for the sons has remained unchanged. Similarly, if you look at the variation of child sex ratio across India, what is alarming here is that the child sex ratio tends to be lower in those states which are considered to be relatively prosperous. For example, Punjab has one of the highest per capita income in India. However, it has one of the lowest child sex ratio in India. The same thing can be said about even Haryana as well. On similar lines, if one looks at the prosperous states such as Maharashtra and Gujarat, even in these states, the child sex ratio has reduced. Now, the lower child sex ratio can be attributed to the adoption of modern technology such as the prenatal diagnostic testing. Now, this particular testing is to be done in order to find out if the baby is having any kind of genetic deformities so as to take corrective actions. However, the people are misusing this particular technology in order to find out the sex of the fetus. So, if the developing fetus happens to be a girl, it is immediately aborted. On similar lines, there have been growing instances of female infanticide in India. Hence, in order to prevent the misuse of this particular technology, the Parliament of India has enacted the Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act 1994. The basic objective of this particular act is to ban the use of the sex selection techniques. This particular act also seeks to register and regulate all the ultrasound clinics in India. Apart from that, more importantly, all the doctors in India are compulsorily required to keep the medical records of the prenatal test. Now, this is done in order to ensure that the doctors do not misuse this particular technology. So, under this particular act, all the doctors who carry out the prenatal diagnostic testing are compulsorily required to fill up a form which is known as the Form F. And the failure to fill up the Form F is considered to be a criminal offence under this particular act. So, what has happened in case of India is that some of the doctors had failed to keep the medical records of the prenatal test. Because of their failure, these doctors were tried and convicted under this particular act. Accordingly, a federation of doctors had filed a PIL before the Supreme Court stating that the failure of the doctors to keep the medical records of the prenatal test should not be treated as a criminal offence. They were arguing that it is merely a clerical error and hence should not be treated as a criminal offence. Now, upon hearing the arguments and the counter arguments with respect to this particular case, the Supreme Court of India has now taken a stand that failure to maintain the medical records of the prenatal test by the doctors would be treated as a criminal offence as stated under the Act. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us first understand the argument put forward by the Federation of Doctors and then we'll understand as to what is the Supreme Court judgment on this particular case. Now, with respect to the arguments put forward by the Federation of Doctors, the Federation argued that the failure to fill up the Form F should be treated only as a clerical error and it should not be treated as a criminal offence under this particular act. Secondly, the Federation argued that a doctor who had failed to fill up the Form F, he is treated on par with a doctor who has conducted the sex determination test, which means to say that the punishment which is awarded to a doctor, it is not commensurate with the offence which is committed. So the basic essence of the argument put forward by the Federation of Doctors was that a particular doctor may not have conducted the sex determination test. However, if he has failed to fill up the Form F, then such a doctor is treated as a criminal under this particular act. And accordingly, the Federation of Doctors argued that the keeping of medical records by the doctors should not be made compulsory. Now, the Supreme Court was of the opinion that the dilution of the obligation to keep the medical records would defeat the purpose of the Act to check the female feticide. That means to say, if there is no obligation on the doctors to maintain the medical records of the prenatal test, under such circumstances, the doctors may actually engage in the sex determination test, and this would defeat the purpose of the Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act 1994. Apart from that, the Supreme Court ruled that the filling up of Form F is a responsibility of the government and this responsibility has to be fulfilled in accordance with the provisions of the law. And lastly, the Supreme Court also ruled that if the doctors fail to keep the medical records, under such circumstances, the authorities may find it difficult to monitor and implement this particular act. And accordingly, the Supreme Court of India has ruled that the maintenance of medical records relating to the prenatal test is compulsory and all the doctors should compulsorily fill up the Form F in India. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now the next article appears on page number 6. The title of the article is An Image Makeover of the Belt and Road Initiative. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, International Relations, under the subsection India and its neighborhood relations, as well as bilateral and regional agreements involving India or affecting India's interest. Further, this article is also important because in previous year UPSC Mains 2018, a related question on One Belt One Road initiative has already been asked. Before analyzing this particular article, let us first look into its background. In the year 2013, China unveiled its ambitious project known as the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, this particular initiative aims to connect Asia with Europe and Africa through a network of roads, railway lines, and maritime routes as highlighted in this particular diagram. The basic idea behind the Belt and Road Initiative is to strengthen the infrastructure, trade, and investment link between the countries. Now, the Belt and Road Initiative was recently in news because China had organized the second Belt and Road Forum in the last week of April. A number of countries, including India, have raised concerns with respect to China's Belt and Road Initiative. In this regard, China has promised that the Belt and Road Initiative would undergo a complete makeover. Hence, as part of this video analysis, let us first understand the various concerns with respect to the Belt and Road Initiative and how China has promised to address these concerns. Let us now understand the various concerns with respect to the Belt and Road Initiative. The first concern here is with respect to the selection of projects to be executed under the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, some of the countries have stated that most of the projects to be executed under the Belt and Road Initiative, all such projects are chosen according to the priorities set by China, which means to say that the projects selected under the Belt and Road Initiative do not take into account the development priorities of the recipient country. Hence, the project selection under the Belt and Road Initiative goes against the interest of the recipient country. The second concern is with respect to the labor employment. Now, you all must be aware that the China is labor surplus country, and in order to maximize its utilization of the labor, it is found that China is employing its labor in the construction of projects in the Belt and Road Initiative in the other countries. And because of the employment of Chinese labor, the recipient country is not being able to provide employment to its own citizens with respect to construction of these projects. Thirdly, most of the projects to be executed under the Belt and Road Initiative, they are invariably being awarded to the Chinese companies. And these Chinese companies are in turn sourcing the raw materials and products from China. So overall, the Belt and Road Initiative is actually benefiting the Chinese economy more than the recipient countries. The next biggest concern with respect to Belt and Road Initiative is the debt trap for the recipient country. Normally, it is found that China is overvaluing its projects executed under the Belt and Road Initiative, wherein China is promising higher returns to the recipient countries from the projects. Because of such a promise, countries are borrowing more amount of loans from China for implementing such projects. However, over a period of time, the returns from such projects have reduced, because of which the countries have fallen in the debt trap. Now, for example, if you look at the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka had planned to build this particular port on the promise of higher returns by China, because of which Sri Lanka had taken loans from China. However, Sri Lanka was unable to pay loans to China, because of which the control of this Hambantota port has been passed on to a Chinese company. So because of this, concerns have been raised that if the projects executed under the Belt and Road Initiative becomes unviable and unsustainable, then the recipient countries could fall into the debt trap. Further, apart from establishing the trade and investment links, one of the basic objectives of the China's Belt and Road Initiative is to improve its economic dominance and the political hegemony across the world. And this is in turn countered by countries such as India and USA. Further, if the Belt and Road Initiative has to be successful, then the countries from South Asia and Southeast Asia have to fully participate in the Belt and Road Initiative. However, if you look at countries such as Vietnam and Maldives, they are quite reluctant to participate in the Belt and Road Initiative. And lastly, as you all must be aware, China has decided to include the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as part of Belt and Road Initiative. Now, India has taken a strong exception to the inclusion of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor under the Belt and Road Initiative since it goes against its sovereignty and territorial integrity. So, these are some of the concerns with respect to the Belt and Road Initiative. And as discussed during the recent Second Belt and Road Forum, China has decided to address some of these concerns, wherein China has promised to have a complete makeover of the Belt and Road Initiative. In this regard, let us understand certain promises given by China with respect to the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, as we have discussed before, the projects to be executed under the Belt and Road Initiative were decided solely by China depending upon its priority. Hence, in order to address this particular problem, China has promised that the selection of the projects shall be done based upon the priorities of the recipient country. And for the selection of projects, China will hold prior consultations with the recipient country. Such a move by China is expected to benefit the recipient country and can encourage more countries to become part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Secondly, China has decided to improve the transparency in financing of projects. Thirdly, in order to ensure that the recipient countries do not fall into debt trap, China has promised to ensure that the projects to be executed shall be viable and sustainable in the long term. Further, China has also promised for a zero tolerance for corruption. Apart from that, China also believes that the Second Belt and Regional Forum is a huge success with respect to the implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative. In this regard, let us try to understand some important positives of the Second Belt and Road Forum. Now, first and foremost here, this particular forum had a representation of almost 150 countries across the world. And more importantly, it had also had a representation from some of the international organizations such as the United Nations and the International Monetary Fund. Further, Japan so far was opposed to the Belt and Road Initiative. However, Japan has now changed its stance and believes that the Belt and Road Initiative would give a fillip to the global economy. Nextly, most of the developed countries are opposed to Belt and Road Initiative because of the fact that this would increase the economic dominance and political hegemony of China. In spite of these concerns of the developed countries, Italy has become the first G7 member to participate in. Now, this shows that over a period of time, the developed economies can tone down on their criticism of the Belt and Road Initiative, and they may decide to become part of the BRI in future. Lastly, in order to ensure proper implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative, the 150 countries which participated in this particular forum decided to set up a coordination mechanism, and such a coordination mechanism may be facilitated by the United Nations agencies. So, because of such a coordination mechanism among the 150 countries, there is a potential for the Belt and Road Initiative to evolve into the G150 in future. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. Further, based upon our video discussion, a mains question for the practice here could be: examine the various concerns with respect to the China's Belt and Road Initiative. Do you think the recent promise by China to have a complete makeover of Belt and Road Initiative address these concerns? Comment. Now you can try writing answer to this particular question based upon our video analysis. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 7. The title of the article is A New Fault Line in Post-War Sri Lanka. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Current Events of International Importance. Now you all must be aware, recently 7 suicide bombers carried out attacks in Sri Lanka in various places. Now, this particular suicide bomb attacks was carried out by a local militant organization known as the National Tawheed Jamaat. It is to be noted that this particular local militant organization has been linked to the IS. Now, why this particular article becomes important with respect to your upcoming prelims is that because normally in UPSC prelims, questions have been asked with respect to the places in news. It is in this regard, let us understand some important places in news from Sri Lanka. Now, this particular suicide bomb attack actually took place in 3 places. These places are Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka, and the other two places being Negombo and Battikola. Now the location of these three places has been highlighted on the map as shown below, wherein you can see here that both Colombo and Negombo, they are located on the western coast of Sri Lanka. On the other hand, Battikola is located on the eastern coast. Apart from that, subsequent to these suicide bomb attacks, the Sri Lankan armed forces engaged with the terrorists associated with these bomb attacks and subsequently killed them. And this particular encounter took place in a place known as Santa Marutu, which is located on the eastern coast of Sri Lanka. Apart from that, if one looks at Colombo and Negombo, these two places are basically dominated by Buddhists. On the other hand, Battikola and Santa Marutu are dominated by Tamilians. Apart from that, Santa Marutu is one of the Muslim dominated regions of Sri Lanka. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. Now the next article appears on page number 11. The title of the article is Don't Terminate the GSP Benefits to India. Now you all must be aware, USA has recently decided to withdraw the benefits of Generalized System of Preferences to India. In this regard, 25 lawmakers from USA have recently written a letter to the President Mr. Donald Trump urging him not to withdraw the benefits of GSP to India. In their letter, the US lawmakers have argued that the withdrawal of GSP benefits would not only affect the Indian economy, but it would also adversely affect the US economy. Now, this particular article related to the GSP has been comprehensively been covered in our DNS dated 2nd of November 2018. Now, in this particular video analysis, I have discussed as to what exactly is the generalized system of preferences and how the GSP is an exception to the most favored nation principle of the World Trade Organization. In this video analysis, I have also discussed as to how the withdrawal of GSP benefits would adversely affect the Indian economy. And as stated before, the US lawmakers have argued that the withdrawal of GSP benefits would affect the US as well as Indian economy. Hence, in this video analysis, I have discussed as to how the GSP is a win-win situation for both Indian economy as well as US economy. So since this particular article related to the GSP has been comprehensively been covered in our DNS, what I will do here is that I will attach the previous DNS video for your revision. Further, it is to be noted that the concept of GSP has been in the news from the last 5 to 6 months. In this regard, this particular article related to the GSP becomes important with respect to your upcoming prelims examination. Now, before analyzing this article, let us look into the background. To understand the background of the article, you are required to know about the Generalized System of Preferences, also known as the GSP. Now, this particular GSP is one of the trade preference program which has been provided under the US Trade Act 1974. Now here, the trade preference means that US provides for preference in terms of international trade to some of the countries, wherein US imports certain goods at zero tariff, that is zero import duty, from certain poor and developing countries including India. Now the idea behind importing these goods from the poor and developing countries at zero import duty is to enable the economic growth and development of poor and developing countries. However, you are required to note that the generalized system of preferences can be considered as an exception to the most favored nation principle of World Trade Organization. Now, under the most favored nation, the WTO member countries are required to treat all other member countries equally. Further, it prohibits the WTO member countries from discriminating against each other. However, as we can see here, the GSP is discriminating in the favor of the goods from the poor and developing countries. And since this particular discrimination can be considered to be a positive way of discrimination for enabling the economic growth and development of poor and developing countries, it is allowed under the World Trade Organization. Now this GSP, which has been extended by US to India, has immensely benefited the Indian economy, wherein under GSP, India has so far been exporting almost 3,500 goods to US at zero import duty, and India is considered to be one of the largest beneficiary under the GSP program of US. wherein in the last financial year, India had exported goods worth $5.6 billion under the GSP. However, in April 2018, the US declared that it would review the status of GSP which it had given to India. And with respect to this, USA had mainly two concerns. The first concern was that the Indian imports to US under the GSP was adversely affecting its domestic industry. And the second concern was that the GSP had led to the trade deficit with India. Now, because of these two reasons, in April 2018, the US decided to review the GSP. Now, the article which we are going to discuss here has appeared in the context of the review taken up by US with respect to the GSP for India. Let us now try to understand as to what has happened with respect to the GSP review undertaken by the US government. Now, here the US has undertaken a product specific GSP review. It means that the US has compiled a list of products which were adversely affecting the US economy, and accordingly, the US has come out with a list of 90 products on which it had decided that the duty free imports would be completely revoked. Now, out of the 90 products which are notified by the US government, at least 50 goods are the Indian goods, and these Indian goods are typically the agricultural goods as well as the handloom goods. So, which means that going forward, India would not be able to export these 50 agricultural and handloom goods to US at zero import duty, and they would be imported at the normal tariffs as imposed by the US government. And this revocation of GSP for 50 Indian products can be considered to be a cause of worry for India because of multiple reasons. Firstly, the revocation of GSP would lead to decrease in the Indian exports to US. Secondly, it would adversely affect the profit margins of micro, small and medium enterprises which are involved in the manufacturing of handlooms in India. Thirdly, you have to understand that the micro, small and medium enterprises are considered to be main source for employment of women in India. So reduction in the profit margins of MSMEs would adversely affect the employment scenario in the Indian economy. Further, the revocation of GSP would adversely affect the export of the agricultural goods from India, thus leading to the decrease in the farmers' income. Now, these are some of the concerns which we can raise with respect to the Indian economy for the decision taken by US with respect to the GSP review. Now, it has been argued that the revocation of GSP by US on some of the Indian goods is a bad decision. This is because so far the GSP has not only brought benefits to India, it has also brought benefits to US economy. So it has been stated that the GSP is a win-win situation for both India as well as US. It is in this particular context it has been said that the revocation of GSP on some Indian goods by US is a bad decision. So it is in this particular context let us understand as to why this GSP is a win-win situation for both India as well as US, and secondly as to why the revocation of GSP is bad for US economy. Now, so far, US has been claiming that the goods imported under the GSP is adversely affecting its domestic manufacturing. However, it is to be noted that the goods which US has imported under the GSP accounts for around $20 billion, which is hardly 1% of the total imports into US economy. So one can easily say that the goods imported by US under the GSP has not adversely affected its economy. And the second point to be noted here is that the GSP products which are exported by India to US are mainly raw materials and intermediaries to be used in the manufacturing. And these raw materials and intermediaries do not compete with the finished goods in the US market. So, contrary to the claims by the US that the GSP is adversely affecting the domestic manufacturing, in reality, the GSP products exported by India are actually promoting the domestic manufacturing in US. Thirdly, it can also be stated that the GSP products exported by India is benefiting the consumers and manufacturers in US by providing them the products at a cheaper price, as well as they are able to provide the high quality alternatives for the domestic manufacturers in US. Fourthly, it can be stated that the GSP has been able to fulfill its objective of promoting the economic growth and development in poor and developing countries, including India. And lastly, the Indian government has taken the concerns of US with respect to the trade deficit, wherein the government of India has taken certain efforts such as the purchase of shale gas and the defense goods from US with the intention to reduce the trade deficit. Now, because of these efforts, exports from US to India may increase in future. Thus, because of the reasons which we have discussed here, one can state that the GSP has not only brought benefits to Indian economy, it has also brought benefits to the US economy. So it is in this particular aspect we can clearly argue that the revocation of GSP on 50 Indian products by US is actually a bad idea even for the US economy. And such a decision would have long term implications for both Indian economy as well as the US economy. Now, based upon our video analysis, these 4 questions shall be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answers to these 4 questions. We shall be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. Now, the first question here is, consider the following statements related to the generalized system of preferences adopted by US. The first statement here is, it allows a duty-free import of certain goods into the US economy in order to promote the economic growth in poor and developing economies. Now, this statement here is correct. The second statement reads as, the products imported by US under the GSP constitute a major chunk of its imports. Now, this statement here is wrong. This is because the products imported by US under the GSP constitute only around 1% of the total imports by US. The third statement reads as, the GSP is considered to be an exception to the MFN. Now, this statement here is correct. So if you look at the options, the correct answer to this particular question is C. Now coming to second question, the question here reads as, consider the following statement with respect to the trends in the GST collection. The first statement here reads as, the GST collections have consistently increased year on year since its implementation. As we have discussed, this statement here is correct. The second statement reads as, the monthly GST collection has never crossed rupees 1 lakh crore since its implementation. Now this statement here is wrong. This is because the monthly GST collection has crossed rupees 1 lakh crore at least 5 times since its implementation. The third statement reads as, among the different components of GST, the central GST contributes to the highest share. Now this statement here is wrong. This is because the integrated GST contributes the highest share. So if you look at the options, the correct answer to this question is A, that is 1 only. Now coming to the third question, the question here is, which among the following contributes the highest share to the revenue of the central government? And as we have discussed, among all these 4 components, it is the corporate tax which contributes the highest share to the revenue of the central government. Now coming to the fourth question, the question here is, which of the following is or correctly matched? That is the honor to the Indian PM and the country. Now you all must be aware that the Prime Minister Modi has been given a number of international awards by the countries across the world. It is in this particular regard, this particular question has been framed. Now if you look at the Zayed medal, this particular medal has been given by the United Arab Emirates to Prime Minister Modi for strengthening the relationship between India and UAE. Similarly, the Order of St. Andrew has been given by Russia for strengthening the India-Russia relations. So accordingly, if you look at the options, both these options are wrongly matched. Hence the correct answer to this question is D, that is neither 1 nor 2. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us look at the question for the day.